Okay, in the last video you saw me removing these from the donor car at the junkyard, utilizing the tan interior, and I've already pulled my black interior panel off of the seat. This was the portion that was completely broken on mine. It had passed the point of no return realistically because it's completely broke. But these panels that I got from the junkyard were in really good shape, but they do have some cracking here, as you can see. And what I'm gonna do is basically reinforce these to prevent these from cracking any further and making them non-usable. From what I can tell, what causes these cracks to break is BMW put staples into the plastic, which I think over time, basically with the spring loading, causes this to crack. So what I'm doing is I'm basically taking this piece of, this is stainless steel hardened, and basically trimmed it, and I'm going to put it in something like this here to where it's actually drops down into that little channel, and I'll go ahead and rivet it in. This piece needs to be trimmed down a little bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and go trim it, and then I'll follow up on the video showing you guys the finished product with it being riveted in place. Okay, at this point you can see I've installed the riveted pieces on both sides here. I've taken my foam from the original backing from my car. These two pieces have been riveted on both sides. As you can see, it'll be very, very minimal with, if at all visible, with this fabric in place. It's kind of like a foam fabric. So now I'm basically just going to take and use this spray adhesive to put the foam backing back on, because I'm trying to avoid putting any more staples into the plastic, since it seems like that's what's causing it to potentially crack over time. So in order to minimize that, I will just be using the spray adhesive to put everything back together, and that should hold everything nice and tight back on. And then once the bolts are on the back of the seat back, it'll, hold everything in place. So at this point, I just basically took and glued this little edge down right here, sprayed a little bit of glue across this face, and then just right here. And you can see it's getting pretty tacky already. So at this point, I'm basically taking and just putting the pouch over this panel here. This is the back side now that all of the cover's on. These are the hinges, everything's working good, nice and supported now. So basically just taking this and inserting it back into the seat back pouch. good there. Kind of push it around, and you can see here, you can't see the rivets because the foam is basically covering those rivets, so everything still looks completely factory. Can't even notice anything there. On the inside here, you would have to take and kind of stretch this back down. And again, this is something that they staple down here, but since it has these little pins, I basically just stretch it out as best as I can over those little pins there, and then I'll go ahead and glue it down again. So just kind of do that. Makes a bit of a mess when you start to glue it, but if you stretch it pretty good and then throw some glue on it, it actually works out pretty well. If it's a little bit tight, you can kind of just take and push this back around in order to kind of pull the fabric of the leather down in order to get a little bit more slack on this side. This is only stitched in across this stitch here anyways, but in order to just make it so it's not pulling so tight, you can kind of just do that. So it works out pretty good. Alright, so at this point we're basically going to glue this fabric back down to where the factory staples were located. I found it kind of easy to use these clamps to hold things in place if needed, just to ensure that the glue has a little bit of time to dry before it gets anything pulled on it. Realistically, it doesn't even really make a difference because this leather overlaps it, and then this overlaps that, and then this ends up getting locked into the back side of the seat anyways. So it doesn't really make a big difference, but I try to at least anchor it down to kind of like the factory points, just to ensure that, you know, we're kind of doing our due diligence to make sure that it stays and holds like it did at the factory production. So basically just take and spray a bunch of glue across the bottom side of there, and this is the part that I say gets a little bit messy because I personally don't like utilizing gloves for this because the gloves will stick to the glue. So I just take and stretch this piece over these little kind of almost like dowel pins that are here that kind of just help the leather align and help this little piece of fabric align. I'll show you guys up close once I kind of get the backing on in place. Well, this one's actually holding pretty good here, so I won't need to be using the clamps on this one. But sometimes it's a little tight and you'll have to use the clamps. It just kind of is a seat by seat basis here. But as you guys can see, across the base here, these have all been glued. This is holding real strong now, and basically just taking and holding it in place, and then this leather will wrap around, and I'll go ahead and throw a little bit of glue on top of here in order to wrap the leather around there, and then this piece will basically be ready to put on the seat back. So again, a little bit of glue, spray the top of that fabric we just put down, and then go ahead and wrap the leather over those little pins as well. But basically at this point it's going in the opposite direction, and this is where the staples would have been holding through the fabric onto the leather. And this is now where you can take and put some of these clamps down in order to just hold the leather itself flat while the drying process happens. Just let that set up for a few minutes and then we'll come back to it. Alright, so now we're at the point where we can go ahead and just take the clamps off. The glue is dried enough to hold everything in place. And now you can see the leather, go ahead and it's pushed down real nice across this, you know, holding on very, very nice. You know, nothing on the back side, everything still looks really good. Factory, no issues there. So at this point, the seat is now ready to be installed back on the seat back. This piece fell out, so I'll go ahead and put this one back in. Okay, so now that we got everything glued down here, we're just gonna let this part, you know, now sit. Everything's just pretty much sitting in place. And what we gotta do is we gotta now take and put these back on to the sides here. And again, this is another spot that BMW stapled all the way down. But me personally, I don't like the fact that it was stapled because it seems to be weakening the ABS plastic. So again, this is something that I'm just gonna glue down. I'm again not worried about it just because this part bolts to the actual seat back and squishes the fabric. So there's no way for it to actually fall out once it's in place. So basically this part, you know, is just a reverse, you know, what was already done. It does have these little kind of dowel pins type things here to kind of align the fabric. So basically what I do is I go ahead and just take this, make sure you kind of throw a rag or something over the leather just to make sure that we don't get a little bit of overspray or anything on here that really shouldn't be on there. And you don't want to, you know, potentially damage any of our finished leather. So we got a little bit of glue on there. And again, this is not something that you need to spray a lot on, but now if you accidentally spray too much, like I said, you don't have to really worry about it because this part's not visible. So even if you do spray a little bit much, it's not gonna hurt anything. It's a non-visible part. It's not gonna make a difference whatsoever. So right now I'm basically just stretching it over those little dowel pin and alignment pins. Keep everything kind of tight to the seat back here. Need a little bit more glue, just kind of on this little bottom edge. So very carefully spray a little bit on there. You can use a Q-tip if that helps. Just kind of, you know, not have to worry about getting so much overspray if you're missing an area. So makes it kind of simple. So at this point, everything's good. The webbing's good. The hinge is back on. You can see that it's been glued across here. Glue's still setting up a little bit, but again, this is the part that bolts the seat back, and so it'll sandwich between here on the seat back, and you won't have to worry about that fabric pulling away. So this one should be good. I'm gonna go ahead and button up the other side, and then we'll come back to it for the seat back install. Okay, so at this point, I got both webbing on for the seat backs. The panel is literally ready just for install on the back of the seat now. So here's the actual seat back here. This part, you know, is just a reverse setup of what we did when we pulled it off. You basically just go ahead and slip the hinges into this portion here. You kind of walk this bottom portion that has this clips on there and then pop these threaded portions through the back. And once that's on, you can go ahead and take your 10mm bolts here and push those in. Here is the aluminum panel that should pop through. So I'm missing one of them here. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and turn this around again. Make sure that's actually lined up in order to pop through. sometimes as you're working on these, they're just aluminum tabs, so they kind of get bent, and they're really simple just to bend over with your finger. So once you get them pushed through, you can kind of bend them up. Then you can turn the panel around and go ahead and put those 10 mil bolts on, or nuts, excuse me. They're just plastic little nuts. Very simple process at this point. Now, one thing to note is these studs have square backs, and sometimes if you push down on them, they'll pop out of the plastic. So in order to just make sure that they tighten up without spinning, just make sure you kind of jerk on them a little in order to pull them to the top so that they're locked in the plastic portion. So when you snug these down, the stud itself won't spin. And then when you're tightening these down, don't push down on it. Just let the screw work itself down, or the bolt work itself down. And just go back, make sure they're all snugged up really nice. So at this point, everything works like it's supposed to. It's not broken, and it fits flush. Everything looks factory, but the springs are not in. So here's the springs for this. Not really an easy process on this as far as how to put the springs in. The way I do it is I put the two front portions of the spring in first, and then I basically just take and push this with my fingers. And really, after everything's all snapped in, you just have to double check that these two front portions are pushed down as much as possible. They got two tabs right here, or the two prongs that go into the hinge itself. I do kind of bend them and make sure they're as even as possible. So when you go ahead and push them in here, and then push this down into the spring itself, or the hinge itself, push that down, and now the springs are on, and the back is completely flush and holding in place, and works exactly like it should. So, completely fixed. If you can see the side panel itself, looks very good, very flush. You can't see any of the rivet marks. It looks completely factory. This panel is extremely expensive at BMW, so this is a kind of a nice little fix. This is also a very nice preventative measure by putting those stainless steel plates in order to minimize the chance of yours cracking. You know, here I live in Arizona, and plastic just doesn't last out here with the heat. So over time, a lot of this plastic breaks for whatever reason. So this is a nice little upgrade / preventative measure. You know, good upgrade, but definitely doable for your novice installer. If you guys like this video, make sure you guys take the time to subscribe and hit that like button. Thank you guys.